My name is Jill Brown. I'm the Director of Finance for Ridgefield Public Schools, and my team and I would like to thank CABE for putting this together. We think these learning opportunities are great, and thank you for involving CASBO in the group. We are always happy to support our boards of education and our district leaders and share some of our insight into school finance. So our topic today is best practices for financial oversight. And our team today is comprised of Karen Budfiglio, who is the business manager in Glastonbury Public Schools, which is a DERG B district. Myself, again, it's Jill Brown, Director of Finance in Ridgefield Public Schools, which is a DERG A district. And Michael Lopes, who is the Assistant Director of Finance and Operations in South Windsor Public Schools, which is a district, or DERG B district. And Karen?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Hi, I'm Karen from Glastonbury. Sorry, my Zoom says it's not responding. I just lost my picture, so I want to make sure you guys could hear me. The government, you can hear me. Okay, sorry, my video just stopped working. The Government and Standards Board, commonly known as GASB, was established in 1984. They operate under the guidance of the Financial Accounting Foundation, FAF, who is responsible for the oversight, administration, financing, and appointment of GASB. All public school districts in Connecticut follow the standards outlined by GASB, as well as local, town, and municipal offices. They are independent private sector organization that establishes financial reporting standards for the state and local governments that follow generally accepted accounting principles. The GASB develops and issues accounting standards through a transparent and exclusive process intended to promote financial reporting that provides useful information to taxpayers, public officials, investors, and others who use financial reports. They require year-end financial reports that are created and published by the town and the audit firm who performs the yearly audit. All districts are required to submit state and federal expenditure reports. States have the constitutional authority for the provision of the education, and as such, they bear the final responsibility for fiscal accountability. Likewise, federal funds are distributed to local districts through states and require adequate accounting and reporting procedures. These reporting requirements have led to the development and adoption of the uniform budgeting procedures and accounting standards. During today's webinar, our team will review the focus areas that we agree are the most uniform and common to all Connecticut school districts when discussing best practices for financial oversight. Now I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Karen. So today our presentation will focus on 4 major areas. As a group, we agree that our framework ensures best practices for financial oversight. So first, we'll start by going over how to set up procedures, controls by which all fiscal activities in a district can be accumulated, categorized, and reported and controlled. Then we will go through expenditure oversights, reining in all departments to stay true to their budget allocations and appropriate expenditures. Then we will discuss state and federal financial reporting requirements to which school districts must adhere. These reporting requirements have led to the development and adoption of the uniform budgeting procedures and accounting standards. Lastly, we'll recognize and be guided by the Board of Education's policy, and we will demystify what the board's role is when it comes to budget and finance altogether. And so first, again, like I said before, we will start with procedures and controls. But before we do any of that, we must really consider staffing. Every school district has different capabilities as far as your financial complexity, how much staff you have available to you, how large your district is, and how much funds you're working with. So in this picture here, you will see I used a remote as a perfect example. If you cram too many features into a single remote, you lose the remote. You won't really.
I'm on my way.
Can I remind our attendees to please mute? Sorry, Mike.
Yeah. So if you cram too many buttons into a remote, you lose the remote or it loses its functionality. Really comparing to if a staff member has too many responsibilities and that staff member decides to leave the district or is gone for, an extended period of time, it really can become very difficult for a district to operate financially. And this is also really important when you think about segregation of duties, and optimally building redundancies by cross-training. So this next slide here is a risk assessment matrix. And again, all my slides will really be in question format for you guys to really think about how you guys operate, and to understand, once you understand how to answer those questions, you'll understand what as a district you'll need to do. And first we'll go through risk assessment matrix, where the severity and the likelihood are really the two most important factors. So the more likely something is to happen, that needs to be something that is paid attention to. But the severity and the outcome, if that risk were to actually happen, also plays an extreme factor. So the more severe the risk is, the more we also want to look at the likelihood and see. And so if both of those are high, those are some things we really need to pay attention to as far as controlling. We also need to take a look and see, how does the district stay abreast of issues among risk, and how do other school districts and other companies, maybe local companies nearby, compare. So the first step in this process is really just to create the fiscal control. So we want to ask ourselves, who will create the fiscal control? Who needs to be aware of it? How does the fiscal control affect other procedures and policies you currently have in place? Does it align with federal and state guidelines? How will it be enforced? And who needs to really be involved in the control? We really want to just make sure that in creating the fiscal control, you are able to answer all these questions thoroughly. And then that'll bring us to the next step. And that'll really be the communications of fiscal controls. So how do the staff members learn about the new fiscal controls? How do board members find out about the fiscal controls? And how does management ensure that the board and the staff understand their role when that fiscal control is created? From there, we're going to monitor the effectiveness of the fiscal control. So once you have created a fiscal control and you've communicated it, and now you've actually put it into place, we also need some method to make sure that that fiscal control is actually being effective. Has the risk been mitigated, and are there any new risk as a result of this control? And then we really do want to go back and look and ask ourselves, why are we really doing this? We want to make sure we're being accurate with the financial information that we have. We're being reliable. We can detect fraud if there is something going on. We don't want to assume that there's fraudulent behavior going on between finances in the district. But if there was something going on and you decided to test something and say it's a phishing test, you want to be confident in the fiscal controls that you have, that somebody would be able to catch on to that and stop it from occurring. We also want to assess management's effectiveness, efficiency, compliance, and reporting. Let's not forget that these are local taxpayer dollars, state and federal funds. And then, so my last slide, in talking about procedures and controls, I decided to list out a bunch of different controls school districts and Board of Ed really want to pay attention to. And just to name a few: journal entries. So just having an approval process for who's checking someone else's journal entries when they make them. Petty cash. So even though they're small amounts of money, we want to make sure we have a good method to make sure that the petty cash is properly accounted for. Payroll, signing off on payrolls, registers. So who's getting paid and who's signing off, who's paying them, and who's signing off on this information being accurate. All of these things really just come back to segregation of duties and checks and balances. And so we want to make sure that we always find ways to check each other's work and make sure that your school district has these fiscal controls in place to make sure that there is as little as risk as possible. So from here, we'll move on to the next area of focus, which is expenditure oversight, and Karen will lead us through that part.
Thank you, Michael. By accumulating accurate baseline data Accounting provides the budget process the information necessary for compiling the financial data over multiple periods of time, which can include prior year, current year, and future annual revenues, with the actual current year line items of expenditures and budget performance. In most districts, budgets requests are submitted to the business office from the administrative team. The requests are then compiled and presented as the superintendent's proposed budget to the Board of Education, staff, and community. In my district, public budget workshops are held with the Board of Education to present the superintendent's proposed budget. This provides the opportunity for questions and answers. Financial oversight is a key function of all school districts and ensures accountability. It's essential that the business office have the staff needed to achieve this. The district's business office staff must implement and maintain budgetary and accounting controls that ensure the accuracy of financial reporting. These controls are put in place to provide reasonable assurance that assets are safeguarded and all transactions are recorded and executed with the administration's authorization. The role of the school board. School boards are responsible for reviewing fiscal activities, although no fiscal experience is required to be elected as a board member. The board members depend on the superintendent and business manager to provide accurate budget and financial information. Thanks, Bill. The school administration's responsibility is to maintain budgetary and accounting controls designed to ensure the reporting of reliable financial information. Financial reporting varies by district depending on each town council and board requirements. Most towns will provide the town council with updates that include expenditure summaries showing the total budget, expenditures to date, and percent of the budget expended to date. Some towns include a financial comparison showing the current fiscal year as compared to the same period of time for the previous fiscal year. Financial reporting. Each month, the Board of Education in town should reconcile education expenditures. This should be done by obtaining expenditure reports from the town that shows the monthly transactions they provide for funding. The report should be compared to the monthly expenditure reports generated from the financial management system that all the payroll, accounts payable, and other transactions and expenses are posted to. The monthly reconciliation report should be provided to the town, listing any outstanding transactions that need to be completed on either side. Reports should be provided to the Board of Education and Town Board of Finance. The frequency of these reports are often defined by the town charter and Board of Education policies that are in place. Budget oversight and transfers. The Budget Committee of the Board of Education should meet regularly with the superintendent and school business manager to review the status of the budget. Financial information is shared and reviewed with the committee and reported to the Board of Education members at a regularly scheduled board meeting. Any revised budgets also need to be reviewed by the Budget Committee and approved by the Board of Education. All expenditures need to align with the district's budget. The original Board of Education approved budget is created using estimated amounts based on previous budgets and final year-end expenditures. Expenditures and future budget projections need to be constantly reviewed. Several times during the fiscal year, a revised budget should be done and presented to the Board of Education to approve inter-program budget transfers between line items within the approved total budget at a regularly scheduled board meeting. The transfers cover changes in funding needs for reasons of personnel turnover, increased or decreased enrollment, staffing changes, and/or revised cost information for various accounts such as health insurance or casualty insurance premiums and utilities. It's very important to remember that this process does not increase the total amount of the budget. It just moves the funding to other lines within the budget. Annual reporting and audits. Per state statute, the school boards must annually report a summary that includes the total cost of maintenance of the school, funds received from the state and other sources for maintenance of schools, and the net cost to the town for the maintenance of schools. The town is responsible for hiring auditors and overseeing the annual audit process. The audit is performed in accordance with the generally accepted accounting auditing standards and provides information to ensure that funds are being spent and recorded accurately. The audit also looks at district's budgetary and accounting controls. The audit's results should be shared with the board. Our third focus area is financial reporting and requirements. Jill Brown will take us through this section.
Thanks, Karen, and hello again. During this section, we will review the requirements from the state of Connecticut and from the federal government for financial reporting to which all Connecticut school districts must adhere. In order to give a clear picture of our required reporting, it's helpful to back up a bit and explain some of the legislative work and progress that has gotten us to where we are today. So let's look back to 2012, when the Connecticut General Assembly required the Connecticut State Department of Education to develop and implement a uniform system of accounting for school revenues and expenditures. This law mandated that the uniform system of accounting include a chart of accounts to be used at the school and district level for reporting revenues and expenditures. The uniform chart of accounts is now in place at all Connecticut school districts. It's the uniformity that ensures comparability between school districts' financial data, which promotes transparency and accountability. The chart links the operations of departments, agencies, and offices, and each accounting string displays the funding source. So whether or not funding comes from the town's general fund or from a grant or a capital account. It displays the function, telling us whether it's a regular instruction, special education, maybe transportation or equipment. It explains the object, which tells us if it's certified salaries or benefits or professional services or even out of district tuition, for example, and its location, so down to which school. And then lastly, the programming. Is it art? Is it math? Was it music or athletics? So here's a quick example from my own school district about what I'm describing. Here you can see an expenditure with its corresponding account string, and it's displaying an expenditure amount of just under $2.7 million. But because of the uniformity in all of our account strings, I can tell by looking at this where the 2.7 million was expended, and my colleagues can probably do the same because it's all in the components of the account string. So we're going to take this bit by bit. That 100, which is the first portion of the account string, that tells me that this was a general fund expenditure. This came from our town's tax dollars. Next, in blue, that's the function number. And the 1,000 tells me that it was regular instruction. Next is the object number. That 1110 tells me that this was spent on certified staff or teaching staff. The 39 is our location number, and that location in Ridgefield corresponds to the high school. And then lastly, in purple, that tells me that this was a science expenditure. So just from looking at the account string, I know that this was science teachers at Ridgefield High School for last year. For several years, as school districts were updating their chart of accounts accordingly, the State Department of Ed was developing the Education Finance System, or the EFS platform. EFS is a platform to which we all report our annual expenditures. It's a standardized set of processes that captures, manages, and audits our expenditure statistical information. It also calculates our per pupil expenditure by school and by school district. And it supports the federal level reporting, which is required by the ESSA, or Every Student Succeeds Act. We'll talk about that in a sec. And the EFS reports all of our expenditure data from the 2017-18 school year and beyond. So the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, was signed into law back in 2015. It replaced the No Child Left Behind Act of 2002. ESSA is what expanded the requirements for state and school district report cards to include fiscal reporting, such as our per pupil expenditures at federal, state, and local levels. This includes the actual personnel expenditures and non-personnel expenditures, and it has to be disaggregated by source. Having a uniform chart of accounts across the state of Connecticut gives us the capability to disaggregate expenditure information for federal level reporting that is now required with the passage of ESSA. Financial administrators at the state level can now report out expenditures across the state for specific programming, like education for gifted, or what was your elementary expenditures, or your middle or high school expenditures. We can report out school by school. We can report out just our pre-K spending. We can report out certified staff versus non-certified staff. What did we spend on benefits? And a myriad of other expenditure data. We can now plan for state level funding, federal grant level funding, and forecast years down the road by following our expenditure trends. We report out student enrollment across our districts by using the same enrollment snapshot of October 1st, and that's consistent with the student membership data that's collected annually by the National Center for Educator Statistics. So next is the grants management system, or what we call eGrants. This is an application that was designed for school districts to apply for grants and to manage the expenditure of grants, track the spending, track the district amounts for all of our grant-related activities. This system was rolled out in 2016. The year-end expenditure reports are required for every grant at the end of the fiscal year. And the eGrant system populates into the EFS system for both federal and state grants. I have for you here a list of common grants at many school districts. What you see on the left are federal grants, and what you see on the right are state level grants. We are going to share these slides with you, and what's underlined, those are hyperlinks if you're interested on looking at some of the grants that are afforded by district. So first on the left, the title grants. Title I supports improving academic achievement of the disadvantaged in school districts. Title II supports preparing, training, and recruiting high quality teachers and principals, which is demanded by the ESSA Act. Title III supports funding for English language learners and immigrant students. And Title IV supports 3 different focus areas, focusing on advanced classes in fine arts, foreign languages, STEAM, and other innovative programming. It supports creating safe and healthy schools through the utilization of social emotional learning and healthy lifestyle habits. And it also supports the effective use of technology and training staff in technology. 2 other large grants are the IDEA grant funds, which were implemented as part of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. These grants support early intervention of special education services with children and disabilities and their families and students with special needs. All programs or materials purchased with IDEA funds must benefit students with individual education plans or IEPs. The IDEA 611 grant supports kids in K through 12, and the 619 is exclusively for pre-K. The Carl Perkins grant supports technical education. It's the main source of federal funding for high school and post-secondary career or CTE programs. Then, of course, we have the ESSER funds. ESSER stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds. ESSER originated as part of the Coronavirus Relief and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act, started back in 2020. It's been amended and updated and includes 3 rounds of funding. ESSER 3 funds are coming to a close. We have to have all funding supported by ESSER 3 obligated by the end of this month, and all of the reconciliation has to be done by the end of December 2024. Then on the right, those are our big state grants. First is the ECS, or the Education Cost Share. That's the state's portion of every school district's budget. The state spends over $2.2 billion in their part of each district's funding. There's also the excess cost funding, which is over 156 million, and that is specifically for special education students that are high cost, or 4.5 times the per pupil expenditure in every school district. There is special funding for agri-science and technology education, over $18 million worth of funding there. Funding for adult education in every school district is over $44 million of funding. Funding for Open Choice, which is a program that allows Connecticut students to go to a different local public school. It's specifically geared towards students in more urban districts, allowing them to attend public schools in nearby suburban districts, looking to level the playing field there. And then we have alliance funding and priority district funding. The alliance districts are local school districts here in Connecticut that are the 36th lowest performing school districts. And there are tens of millions of dollars going out there. All told, over 307 million is out to alliance districts, and priority districts. Over 30 million goes out to priority districts. Those are the 8 towns with the largest populations in the state. Again, these are links so that you can look and see what sort of funding went out across the state. That brings us to MBR, or the minimum budget requirement. All Connecticut towns have an MBR with very few exceptions. And what that basically says is that a town or a city is not allowed to budget less for education than it did in the prior year. If there's been something like redistricting or closing of a school or something really in particular, the school district or the town can apply to the state to see if it can go below what was afforded the prior year, but otherwise it has to be at least the same that it funded in the prior year. And then last for me is maintenance of effort. What this requirement is, it obligates any local education agency that is receiving IDA funding, that large federal grant. They have to spend at least the same amount of local and state funds as it did the prior year for special education students. And we have to demonstrate that we've met maintenance of effort in 2 areas, in eligibility and in compliance standards. And if a district cannot demonstrate that it's met maintenance of effort, they'll be ineligible to receive IDEA funding. And IDEA funding is a significant amount of funding from the federal grants. So you want to make sure that you make maintenance of effort. The 3 of us are going to take you through our last section, starting with Mike, and this is on board policy and the board's role.
Thank you, Jill. So first question is really, what is the board's role in financial oversight? And in general, the board has 3 main responsibilities. And so the first is developing the annual budget to run the school system. The second is setting school policies. And the third is hiring and evaluating the superintendent. So getting in the weeds of financial oversight is exactly what you hire us for, but you should always ask questions and know how your community is prioritizing expenditures. Legislatively, this is what all Board of Eds must do. These are likely the most obvious duties that you already know. You probably did this research when you considered running for your local Board of Ed, but just for a quick review, number one, maintain good schools. So that includes providing equal opportunity, finance at a reasonable level, provide diversity, follow the state mandates pertaining to public school education. Providing books, materials, technology, provide equity of resources across your schools, properly maintain your buildings and facilities, and ensure all schools are safe.
To the superintendent, you will engage the community to prepare a statement of educational goals for your school district. The superintendent and their administration team will guide you as to what is appropriate for educational goals, and the board can guide what is right for the community. Although your superintendent will help you submit a strategic school profile for each one of your schools, including an alternate program or school as defined by the Connecticut General Assembly, the strategic school profile data is compiled at the state level and disseminated to each school. The Board of Education staff is responsible for writing the narrative for this report. So how do you do these things? One of the most important things you can do as your role as a member of the Board of Education is to advocate for the school budget. There may be a line item or two that you feel differently about than your school administration team, but it's critical that the board be united and collectively support the district's budget. Ask questions to understand what the budget request is for and how it will benefit the district and the students. Remind your community to get out and vote, attend PTA meetings, and ask parents and families to support the school budget.
And we know that in Connecticut, talented superintendents, they're not easy to find. Connecticut's got a limited pool of candidates for superintendent. So if you find a super that is right for your community, be sure to support their work. Give them thoughtful feedback, allow them space to do the work. They're your district CEO. So the superintendent will support the district's day-to-day operational needs. But they need you to give them feedback and offer support throughout the community for their work. For all requests and consideration, look back to the board policy. Your policy manual is going to govern almost every item that comes your way. So when in doubt, go back and look in your policy manual. And attending events like this through CABE, through CAPS, through CEA, and other public school education groups, you're going to learn what our biggest challenges are statewide for all school districts, and what you as a board member might be able to do to advocate for change. Share your district's accomplishments and challenges with each other and with other districts, and most importantly, with your local legislators, because then together we can work to affect change where we need to. So this brings us to the end of our presentation today. We're happy to take any questions that you might have, or if you have any wonderings or comments or thoughts about what we've shared with you today.
And if you do have questions, please use the raise hand feature and we'll call on you. That way we don't have multiple people speaking at the same time. Margaret?
Hi, thank you. I'm a Board of Ed member for the new Region 20 in Northwestern Connecticut. And we are newly created, started July 1. We have 4 towns, some are extras and oversight, where it says the towns are annual report. And is that a clear question for you guys?
Did anyone else have trouble hearing her? Because
I couldn't.
Okay.
I couldn't hear
Are
her
you hearing
either.
me?
We can hear you now,
Well,
Margaret.
okay, I'm watching my little audio.
You're frozen. You keep freezing up.
thing. Um,
I wonder
If you could,
maybe, right, type it in the
yeah,
chat.
so my question, man, I off my video. Is that better?
Sometimes
No,
that
okay.
helps.
I'll type it in the chat.
thank you, Margaret. Paul, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. Karen and Jill, Margaret's question is in the chat box.
Can we get access to the presentation? I have this set to be emailed out to the presenters at CAVE, so yes, they can forward it. Does each town of a regional district meet with the Board of Education to reconcile expenditures? So that's going to differ district by district. We have some regions that are comprised of 2 towns, 3 towns, or even 4. And I think that you are certainly within your right to make a request as a board member for what you would like to see as a reconciliation. And I think that you should. Whether you do that quarterly or just at the end of the year would be up to you. And you may want to check your policy as well, because sometimes your policy will dictate how often financial reports come and in what way they come. If it's, by a committee, or if it's done at the board level, or even how often you have to go to the town level. Colleagues, do you have anything else there?
No, I think you hit it right on the nose.
I see a question from Teresa Smith saying, is there a way we can get text of previously successful grants? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Is it okay if I put my audio on? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yeah.
Super. So people do grant applications, and sometimes they succeed and they get money. Other times they don't succeed and they don't get money. So I would like to embark on writing grant applications because my town is in very bad financial state, mainly because a family has moved in who has a child who needs extensive special education, which is dominating our budget. And so I would like to try to assist with that by getting some grants. And back when I was a professor at WPI, people were applying for grants all the time. And it was very easy to get, here's a grant application that succeeded. You can edit this one. So I'm wondering if I could get a leg up that way.
I am not sure of anywhere where you could get previously submitted grants. I know you can for your district, can go on and get them, but that would just be like awards that you already given the money and you would just have a certain dollar amount to work with and do your budget. Jill or Michael, do you know?
We're not communicating. We have here, as they say in the movies, a failure to communicate. I would like to apply for grants. Okay, everybody clear what that is? I would like to apply to those lovely agencies you put on the slide, like Idea 6 and other sorts of things. And I could just write them a letter and say, hi, I'm Therese. I wish I could have some money. And that would look pretty, unprofessional.
So in the eGrants management system, that is the platform for all federal and state grants. Sometimes they have competitive grants where some districts will apply and some other districts may apply and receive different amounts of money dependent upon what their application requested and also the town's ability to pay. Some of what I had on the screen are federal grants like IDEA specifically for special education. And that is predetermined by the amount of your expenditures that have been communicated through the EFS expenditure report at the end of the year, which is what your district spent on special education, right down to the programming, including outplacement tuition. And then that gets all reported up to the federal level. And then the federal level affords us grants back down based on that level of spending in each district.
It sounds like I have to spend it first before I can get money back from the grant.
Sometimes, yes. And for the question that you're asking, for one particular high cost student, the excess cost grant, which is a state of Connecticut grant, once the student costs 4.5 times your per pupil expenditure amount, and most of us are anywhere from the high teens to 20 to 30,000 per student, depending on the size of the district. If you multiply that per pupil expenditure times 4.5, so in ours, our per pupil expenditure times 4.5 is right around $102,000. So if we have an outplaced student that exceeds that amount, they then become eligible for excess cost grant funding. So that first 4.5 times is on the district, whether we knew that they moved into the area or not. Once we exceed that, then we become eligible for excess cost funding. And that funding is a finite pool of funding. So it varies every year how much we get back. And it's usually right around between 68 to 70% of what we applied for, we get back.
Okay, well, actually, thank you for that very precise explanation of the arithmetic, which I had already heard. But what I wanted to know was, in the grant application process, is it all fill in the blank single numerical fields, or is there perhaps a free text?
There's a narrative portion. There's a narrative portion, and in your district, Therese, you could ask your business manager to maybe sit with you and look through the eGrants system so that you
Yes.
could see what's required in that platform.
Yep, I will do that. I just want to ask Judith, offering help. So from my long career, since I'm an old person, I have many occasions of people offering help where they expected to get paid. So forgive me, I have to ask you.
No, it's quite all right.
So
I'm sorry. I was just trying to help clarify, but I didn't want to step on anybody presenting. But I'm a grant writer for a school district. So I was just clarifying that the grants that were reviewed here are entitlement grants. So your town either qualifies for them or they don't.
yes,
The narrative that's included isn't going to make a tremendous amount of difference, though it's required.
I see. So I should get right to it.
Well, you have my email, so you're free to send me a note. I work for another school district. I'm just offering help if you're interested. I'm not
Thank you. I'm glad for help.
advertising
As long as it's
services or
free,
anything like that.
as long as it's free, I would very much like your help.
What district are you with?
I'm in RD11, which is Scotland, Chaplin, and oh, don't tell them that I paused over it, Hampton. And I'm also on the Board of Ed for the elementary school in Chaplin.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So am I going to be able to get your, is it really Judith or is it you, Judith, and we forgot the H?
No, there's no H.
Okay. So would you be so kind as to type your email in?
Sure.
Thank you.
And if I could just jump in, this is Lisa Steimer from CABE, and just caution board members to be careful with this because the staff who report to your superintendent and the board have very different roles in this. And so for board members to be very careful, you do have the staff on board in your school district who does have responsibility for these sorts of things. So I just ask you to exercise caution when you start looking at that.
Sure they do. And she's wonderful. Her name is Jobina and she's absolutely fantastic. We love her. but she is not an infinite resource. And so it's conceivable that she could be helped. But I'll make sure she knows everything I'm up to.
I would also throw in a previous district that I worked in, one of the websites that we use, grants.gov, was a popular website where you can find a lot of competitive grants too. And really what the board members did when I was there was they wouldn't do the application, but they would bring some to my attention that I couldn't find because it's a huge national platform. Wasn't always frequently used because for school districts, there are really specific rules about those types of grants that were on that website. But depending on your school and your size, it might be something that might be a fit. So it's really just like if you were a board member, I would suggest, if you're looking for additional, not entitlement grants, but competitive grants outside of EGMS, if you find something, I would really just bring it to your finance office attention and see if they can really dig into it deeper and see if it's something that they can apply for or it's something they have a shot at.
Thank you. I will do that.
Should I keep going with the questions in the chat, you think?
Also, Ken has his hand or their hand raised. I don't know if they have a question as well.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
I have two questions really. One is, do most school systems pay their own bills or are the bills paid by the city? We get the money transferred to us from the city and we actually write the checks out ourselves. So I was just wondering if most of the towns in the state do that, or do they just get paid by the city?
So
My
again, go ahead.
My second question would be is how are individual board members responsible for a budget that is overexpended?
So I can certainly take the first part of your question. Whether or not a school district is actually cutting checks and sending them out, or if the town is, that's going to depend on your setup. And I've worked in districts that do both of those things. Sometimes the school district and the town offices or city offices are on the same financial system, and the accounting work for the Board of Education takes place with the Board of Ed, but it's the city that actually cuts and sends out the checks and payment of purchase orders. Sometimes we have two different financial systems, and the Board of Ed really does operate as an independent entity. So that's really going to depend on the setup of your school.
Yeah, we have two separate systems, and we overexpended this year, which concerned me, and through an error. But
if you have two separate systems, it's likely that the Board of Ed is actually doing the cutting of the check themselves, but they're communicating with the city, telling them how much they need the payables account to be funded this week, or the payroll account to be funded this week, and the transfers are taking place in the background.
that's pretty much what happens, but it gets confusing with the operating budget and the grants, separating those two. But the thing is, we have more control over transfers within the budget itself. In the city, they don't. So if we went to the city, we would not have that option. We couldn't transfer money from one account to another, which we can do now. But anyway, I was just wondering if most of the cities in the state did one or the other, one option or the other.
Right.
I kind of thought that most of the cities paid the bills through the city. And the board had their own operating system, but the bills were actually paid through the city. But I'm not sure about that. I don't know whether you knew.
Yeah, Ken, I would say in most cases, or probably more frequently, majority of them, school districts usually have their own bank account and will just ask every payroll and every accounts payable run for the town to fund it as we go. I would think from what I've seen, that's most of the cases, but I've also been in a district where it was a shared account. And it's really probably comes down to the softwares, but honestly, the town's comfortability too, as well, with the Board of Ed and their functioning. So if they want to do a shared financial services where the accounting department between the town and the Board of Ed are shared, that might change their approach too and how they do it.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
most of the ones that I know too are separate, like in my district where we do everything for the Board of Ed. I think sometimes too, it depends on the size of the district in the town.
Okay. I know when I taught in Derby for 36 years, so in the early days, the city paid the bills, then somehow it got transferred over to the Board of Ed uh, and we have problems every year, but, does anybody know, liability wise of the board members?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the second part of your question, Ken.
Does anybody have any idea of what the liability is for over expenditures of the budget for individual board members? Somebody told me the state law was that we were responsible for any overage, any overexpended budget.
So that is also what I've heard. I haven't actually seen that scenario kind of take place, because in most cases, if you realize as a Board of Ed, if you're going to go over, the best thing for you to do is to go directly to the town and let them know and warn them ahead of time. And they typically will approve it or will try to help you find additional sources to cover the difference.
Now, I understand that, but we were notified after the fact. It already happened and then we were told.
Right.
I think still in that case, you still just go to the town and you just let them know, because
Yeah,
they may not.
We did, yeah.
Yeah. And I think from there, hopefully that the town can be able to work with you to get through it and there's some sort of agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Ken. Before we get to Akeisha's question, there is a question in the chat box. Let's see. It's from M. Leask.
I see it. Not sure I understand maintenance of effort. Can you summarize how that is determined by total dollars spent, dollars per student, staff to student ratio, or something like that? I know there's 4 methods of testing whether or not you've met maintenance of effort. We can look at just the total amount of local funds collectively. We can look at the total of state plus local funds. We can look at the per capita amount of local funds and also the per capita amount of state plus local funds. I have worked in a district before where they didn't meet maintenance of effort. However, they had several high cost students leave the district during that same year and were able to say, had we paid this tuition, we would have spent X amount instead of Y. So there are some circumstances and flexibility. So sometimes it'll come down to per student, but it's a cumulative comparison. Colleagues, do you have anything else on that?
No, I think you did a great job of explaining it.
I like working with Karen. She's an excellent cheerleader.
Akeisha, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. I have 2 quick questions. And everybody forgive me for not turning on my camera, but I have an allergic reaction problem. And if I turned it on, you would beg me to turn it back off. All right. But anyway, my question is Mr. Lopes, I just want to follow up with the answer that you just gave the gentleman that talked about the budget shortfall, or if there's something where we come up short. And I understand your answer completely about reaching out to the city, but I just want to take it one step further. What if we have reached out to the city? There's a budget shortfall. We can't make payroll. I'm thinking of the worst case scenario. Is the Board of Education members, are they on the hook, financially responsible, like me having to take out money out of my own savings account or 401k, by a judge or whoever said that we had to do it in order to meet I really want to know the answer to that question, because that's going to change the trajectory of whether I want to, go and campaign to do another round. So can you please just, if you don't know, then it's fine. And you let me know who
Yeah.
I go to answer that. But I would love to have the answer to that question.
Yeah, no, I understand you asking for more detail. I would honestly say that CABE is probably your best resource to get a straight answer on that.
And
I just,
also, Michael, sorry not to interrupt you, but I think there might be something in the general state statutes that talk about the liability on a board member.
Okay.
I
Thank you.
remember seeing something in there because I have heard the same thing, that board members are liable.
Okay. Thank you so
Can I-
much. I'm gonna
Can I say
definitely do that.
something? Can I say something?
Yes.
I believe the statute does say that board members are liable, but there is a condition that says if they knowingly overexpend the budget. And I guess that stresses why it's so important as Board of Education members to know your financial situation, because there is a personal liability. And if you're not keeping track of it, then you are liable, because if you're not paying attention and the budget is overspent, you
Mhm.
can have a liability. And that did happen in our town, and every town has different government, but it had to go to a town vote. The town did vote to pay the overage, but had they not, there could have been a personal liability for the board members.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for that. That's very helpful.
I would also suggest that you ask the board council, because I mean, there's got to be some protection from you in that also.
Right.
Because otherwise no one would run for Board of Ed, right?
Exactly.
So there's got to be some that it was deliberate, that you knowingly did something, right? But there's got to be some protection, I would think.
Okay, thank you. And my next question, very quick, my last question. I want to talk about the internal service fund, the fund that we have money stored away there in case we need to dip into it because we are having budget shortfalls. Right now, that fund is controlled by the city. Do you know of school districts that control their own internal service fund, or is it common practice for that fund to be controlled by the city itself?
Definitely common practice in my experience to be controlled by the city or town.
Okay.
You're talking about a non-lapsing at the end of the year, you had surplus and it's a set aside.
Okay. Thank you so much. Those were the only two questions I had. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
yes, I do know it was something, if you were doing a non-lapsing account, it was something that had to go to the town for control. But that has recently changed, where they gave access for the Board of Ed to actually manage their own non-lapsing funds. I'm assuming the districts that put that non-lapsing in place had put it in already. And so if the town's already in control and if it's working fine, then maybe there's no issue. But for new districts that want to consider it, I do know that it does not need to go through the town to be set.
Yeah, and now that I listen to you speak, it kind of makes sense on like a macro perspective. It makes sense to me to have the city control it, because obviously if you're a Board of Education and you're something's going on where funding is just wonky, and then that's something that's consistent, I can see why it's important for the city to have control. I was just wondering if there was any way that we could have control. That's all. But thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah, the answer to that would just be
So in my district, the town has the bank account that controls the funding, but the Board of Education has to vote on how that money's spent. And then the town gives it to us. So the town can't use the funds, they just hold it.
Right. Thank you.
I could say something on that because we just went through that with the shortfall we had. The city definitely has complete control of that money, and they don't have to give it to us. They ended up giving it to us, but they didn't have to. So
Interesting. Thank you.
And I see a follow-up to that, explaining the non-lapsing and what should it be used for. So for me, and the way our administration works with the town here in Ridgefield, I think it's important to remember that it is a partnership, right? The town and the school board, you're both serving the same community, and you need to make it work with whatever the town or city affords the school district to operate with, right? But sometimes there was somebody else on here that mentioned that they had a high cost student move into the school district and that caused them to go over budget. And that is a real challenge because we don't know what those costs might be. And if you have multiple students move in that are high cost students, and it's almost like a double-edged sword, because if your school district offers excellent services for its students with special needs, well, now people want to move to your town because you will have a great school system and you're offering great resources. So sometimes you do get, I don't want to say caught by surprise, but we build a budget in the fall and we present it just after the holiday season, and it's for the following school year. And within that time, enrollment and costs could definitely change. So in most cases, because those things are unforeseen, that may cause you to go over budget. That's a real challenge. So in my experience, that's what the non-lapsing account has been used for. So if a school district ends up with a surplus at the end of the year, they can request to their town or municipality that you hold those funds in a set-aside account, so that if the school district does go beyond its allotted budget, you have that to dip into, which also protects your town or municipality. And again, colleagues, if you have something different to offer.
South Windsor does the same exact thing. Same exact. Also protects the board members as well.
Yep.
Again, if you're talking about liability for going over.
Might be helpful to share too, since these are mostly new board members. If you have a student that has special needs, depending on how severe those needs are, tuition for an outplaced facility could run over $200,000 a year. Then you transport that student. Sometimes the student not only needs a ride to their placement. If it's out of district, it can be $400 or $500 per day, let's say. Sometimes they need a nurse on board with them or an aide on board with them. Sometimes there are other professional services at that outplacement, whether it's physical therapy, occupational therapy, music therapy, different social emotional therapies to support that student. So when we say a high cost student, it could be several $100,000 for one student, depending on what the needs are. So when we say, you've got a budget that's already been developed, and now you have a student that wasn't part of your district at the time of budget development, and if you have multiple students that have moved into your area, it really can be a significant shift in what your special education expenditure is. And I hate to focus on that, but that is probably in our role the biggest challenge that we face, because it's when you develop a budget, it's you are developing based on what your current enrollment is. And most towns do not want you to say, well, we're going to have include a what if and increase the special education, because that increases the tax base and the mill rate, right? So they want you to plan for what you have, but you might end up spending more than that. So it really is a huge challenge for us.
Great. Well, Marie, are there any more questions or raised hands?
I do not see any other questions in the chat box.
Okay. I want you all to know that I referred to Tom Mooney's Practical Guide to School Law with regard to the liability of Board of Ed members. I didn't want to answer off the top of my head because I am not an attorney, so I did not want to misspeak. But if I could just for a moment, and if you do have the 10th edition of Tom's book, it is on page 104. But I will just briefly read what he says about deficits. Local school districts operate on an annual funding basis, and thus local boards of ed have no authority to operate in a deficit. School board members or school officials who authorize expenditures in excess of the funds appropriated to the Board of Education theoretically face personal liability for such expenditures. And he cites Connecticut General Statute 7-349. There are no reported cases, however, of personal liability for authorizing in good faith expenditures that create a deficit. And then he goes on to talk a little bit more about that. But I think that, as was mentioned by our wonderful presenters, good faith is key, and that you're not acting in a reckless or wanton manner. So I hope that provides a little more clarity. Again, I wanted to cite something official instead of just speaking off the top of my head. But I would also like to thank Jill, Michael, and Karen for this great presentation. And thank you to CASBO as a whole for supporting this effort with providing these webinars on school finance, the board's role essentially in this, and also giving board members some great background information as to how this all happens. It's important to understand it. All of this is not your role as a board member, but it gives you a good understanding of how these things come together, because it is an enormous operation to pull this together and move it forward. So you've heard from 3 wonderful school business officials today regarding that. And I thank you all. I thank everybody here, whether you participated as a participant, presenter, or Will Marie, our producer, the patience you all showed with our technical difficulties. You would think the difficulties we had today would have been something we had at the beginning of the pandemic, but here we are 4 years removed and we still have technical issues. So thank you all for bearing with us on this. I just want to mention that our next school finance webinar is on September 25th, how the budget is developed, adopted, and the board's oversight role. That webinar you can register for on our website. It is also at no cost because we are providing these with the support of the State Department of Education. So please register if you have not already done so. And then finally, we have an in-person meeting coming up on December 3rd. And that's our new board member orientation leadership conference. You'll be seeing information coming out soon about that. And that also will help support your need to have some training on school board requirements. So with that, I thank our presenters. I thank all of you for taking your professional development seriously. Well, Marie, thank you for producing a great program. And I wish you all, on behalf of the CABE Board of Directors and CABE staff, a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.